Frost sugarcoats the gravel of Compound E at Hedekrug, and the wind off the Baltic tastes faintly of iron and peat smoke. It is 28th May 1944, not yet 6, when Staff Sergeant Walter Neese of the 96th Bomb Squadron, 2nd Bomb Group, pulls on stiff boots and steps into the grey. He means only to reach the wash-house before the queue. A tower lamp thrums like a second moon, the light catching torn edges of barbed wire and the chalk line prisoners call the no-go. Somewhere a whistle gives the formal challenge. Inside the barrack, tin cups clink and a stovepipe ticks as it cools. Posted orders leave no mercy in them. Curfew before 0600, cross the warning wire and you may be fired upon without further notice. Overhead, a sentry's silhouette unwinds from a winter hunch. The rifle will be the Carabiner 98K, 5 rounds in a fixed magazine, chambered 7.92 by 57 millimeters. Its bolt a hard metal syllable that every man here knows by ear. Procedure is catechism. Challenge, cycle, sight, fire. Neese would have smelled cold oil from the tower, a sweetness under the trench stink that rides every breeze. He takes one more step, not toward freedom, not even defiance, only toward the necessary basin and a few minutes of warmth around his hands. The shot tears the morning. Gravel pops. In the barrack, a mess tin skitters across a plank table and sings, bright and indecent. The guard calls it into the corporal of the post. The words arrive already polished by Berlin's directives after Sagan, shot while attempting to escape. A clerk somewhere has a pre-printed line for that, and when this day is typed, no wind or breath or tremor will appear between the letters. Neese falls inside the wire, inside the rules that have been talked so tight they squeal. Men crowd the windows, breath fogging the glass. Someone mutters the order back like liturgy, times, distances, exceptions, as if a clause could pull a bullet from flesh. The medic lopes from the gate hut, late because the latch sticks when the sea damp rises. He will do what medics do anywhere, press, rap, count, call. But the tower owns the minute hand, and the minute hand has already gone. The corporal writes the time in a cramped, tidy hand that does not shake. Half a world away, at almost this hour, a violinist in Alabama draws a tentative A in a pineboard hall and waits for the chord to settle. That sound will arrive later, travelling through letters and comparisons and the kind of memory that refuses to sit quietly. Here there is only frost, a thin blue wind, and paper already hungry for a name. At Camp Aliceville, Alabama, the air smells of sap and floor polish, and a tin roof crackles under the noon sun. Evelyn Hart, who teaches civics at the high school 3 blocks away, sharpens a pencil until it whispers, then pins a program to the notice board. Beethoven tonight, Haydn on Sunday, chorus practice after mail call. On the table, a crate of sheet music spills like maps that lead away from fear. A corporal with an M1 Garand rests his elbow on a door frame and drinks coffee that smells like sanity. Gefreiter Rudy Mertens, late of the Africa Corps, lifts a dented cornet and tries a scale that comes out shy. He has already learned the rhythms of this place, roll call, work detail, recreation hour, an order that depends not on terror but on provision. Through the open door, a baseball diamond chalked that morning, a soccer pitch stitched into the grass, a stack of gloves waiting for hands. He tells himself it is propaganda, then sees the mess line and wonders how propaganda produces seconds on potatoes. In the quartermaster's shed, tallies chalk the wall, bats, mitts, scores, valve oil, strings. Stateside the guards carry semi-automatic confidence, the 8-round N-block clip of the M1 that goes ping when the last cartridge leaps free, and fixed posts still keep watch with Browning M 1919S, that cough authority, at 400 to 600 rounds per minute. Yet the language of control here is schedule and surplus. The United States holds roughly 425,000 German prisoners across hundreds of camps. Aliceville alone will house about 6,000. enough for a brass band and 3 soccer leagues by June. Evelyn edits the camp newspaper's poem about the river, underlines a misspelled town, then racks chairs in 4s because discipline likes straight lines. She writes to her brother in Italy that music keeps men busy in a way that does not shame them. A German non-com watches 2 American kids hang a banner with poor knots and laughs in spite of himself. The banner reads, "Concert," and a sergeant with forearms like shipyard beams untangles the cord and fixes it with a bowline because loose things bother him. When the quartet tunes, the long note slides into the rafters and finds the soft place between heartbeats. Rudy's fingers loosen into the change from C to G. Evelyn's pencil taps time on the program margin where she will later write one word, necessary. The corporal drains his cup and checks his watch because an orchestra, like a guard mount, starts on time. Somewhere in Europe, a floodlight burns another hour in a tower. Here, the lamps are for music. Karl Bremer reads by a blotter lamp that makes every sheet look official and harmless. The directives that came after the Great Escape at Stalag Luft 3 are stacked to his left. His own fair copies are stacked to his right. Curfews are to be enforced inside compounds, warning wires respected, lethal force authorized when orders are violated. He copies the phrasing exactly because phrasing is armor. Shot while attempting to escape. A clerk's tautology turns a bullet into an administrative event. He signs a requisition for floodlight bulbs and orders a check of tower arcs. On his route, he touches the cool steel legs of a searchlight and notes the gimbal squeak that needs grease. Towers are spaced to overlap fields of fire. The raked strip is combed for footprints. The trip flares are replaced before they fade to pink. A good administrator minds angles and timetables. He counts ammunition cans, tests the whistle, and reviews the challenge, halt, that reduces a life to the distance between syllables. On his desk, a digest from the Reichsanalysts sits like a stone. It says what he already hears in distant skies. Allied industrial tempo has outrun German replacement. Bremer reads that an American plant in Michigan can complete a B-24 Liberator roughly every hour at peak, airframes rolling from Willow Run as though bombers were bricks. The number seems like a magician's lie, yet the paper insists. The tonnage overhead insists. The growing length of the siren insists. What is a curfew against a line that never sleeps? He flips to the page that covers airframe losses and repairs, and for a moment his pencil hovers over the column where he would prefer not to write. He knows competent men stand the towers. They are not cowards. They are cold and tired, and they obey. He knows, too, that leaflets drift sometimes like snow and say things about Red Cross parcels arriving to Allied camps with clockwork regularity. He has never seen a Red Cross parcel. He has seen forms. When he finishes the fair copy, the ink halos a word and makes it look like a target. He blots, dates and signs, the exact gestures he learned as a junior officer when the war was still crisp and full of maps. Outside, a guard tests an MG-42 and the barrel sings for a breath before it settles. In the morning he will review another incident and the language will fit it like a lid. Armour is armour until something larger walks straight through it. Evening lowers like a lid and the guard who takes post 3 climbs a ladder that wheezes in the cold. He clicks on the floodlight and swings the beam across the warning strip. The sand raked so neatly that footprints look like crimes. He nestles the MG-42 into its rest and feels the familiar weight settle into his forearms. The feed belt falls in a practiced loop that will not kink under stress. The tower's geometry is sanctuary and threat, sight lines checked against tower spacing, arcs overlapping like the scales of a mailed fist. Below, men move in squares of light and shadow, counting the paces to the latrine and back as if mathematics could protect them. Procedure is recited the way altar boys learn Latin: challenge, whistle, warning shot, centre mass if the figure crosses the inner line. The Carabiner 98K rides a sling across the guard's chest for precision work. 5 rounds in a fixed magazine, soldier and steel snug as an answer. He rehearses in his head the cadence of the bolt, the sight picture at 100 metres, the breath he will trap to keep the barrel still. A corporal adjusts his watch to the camp clock because time, more than wire, is what rules a camp. Curfew seals the air. 1 minute is permission, the next is risk. The floodlights draw moths and a thin fog of breath from men who try to stay small. The trip flares are tested and swapped before they sour into duds. The field phone line is tugged for a positive click. Under the tower, a dog smells everything and believes none of it. Nies would have learned the terrain by heart, the distance from bunk to basin, the angle that hides him from one tower but exposes him to another. He would have watched the guard change over and marked the lazy ones and the eager ones. Tonight, routine feels heavier than orders. A rumour has gone round that a parcel shipment is late, and hunger makes noise in places men hope God does not hear. The guard thinks, not unkindly, that most men who die in camps die because of minutes and meters, not heroics. He is a competent professional executing a law he did not write and has not the luxury to revise. Still, as he leans into the rail, the winter smell slides past him and reminds him of a village where the river froze shallow and his father lifted him from a patch of dark water by the hood. He tightens his scarf and returns to the sights. Somewhere a whistle prepares its small, bright sound. The shed door rolls back on squealing casters and an ordinary miracle appears. Boxes of bats and chalk, a pyramid of scuffed baseballs, a wire bin of soccer balls that smell like rubber and dust, stacks of sheet music bound with twine, valve oil and spare reeds, scorebooks and pencils. An American quartermaster with grease under his nails scribbles tallies on a slate and swats a fly with a line-up card. The economy of control here is made of lists and excess, not shortages and barked threats. Evelyn builds a schedule that knots a day together. Rehearsal follows work detail, games follow supper. The camp newspaper goes to print before lights out. Guards with M1s lean against posts while the Browning M1919s brood at the corners. Their presence is obvious, but not theatrical. Rudy, who still sounds desert dry when he speaks, tries on a catcher's mitt and laughs when it swallows his hand. He has not yet admitted to himself that a league table, pinned beside the orchestra roster, calms men as efficiently as a parade ground. Aliceville is not a fluke. It is a node in a network. The United States holds roughly 425,000 German prisoners on its soil, spread across hundreds of camps that receive mail, medical inspections, and Red Cross parcels in the kind of cadence only dependable shipping can enforce. Liberty ships, about 2,710 of them built, make such timetables possible. Their steel carries wheat, coffee, tinned meat, uniforms, instruments, textbooks, and, when necessary, the indifferent hardware of war. The same cranes that lift bombs also lift record players. Abundance becomes policy. On the ball field, the groundskeeper drags a rectangle of chain link to level the clay, and a cloud of red dust lifts like memory over the outfield. Rudy watches a sergeant tie a bowline, then a clove hitch. He repeats the motions until the knot lies neat and loyal in his hand. He tells himself that such generosity is calculation, that Americans plan to win hearts as well as battles. He is not wrong. He is also not hungry. Evelyn takes roll for an English class that will end with a poem about trains. She writes the date in the margin because dates become anchors when the war moves too quickly to believe. The quartet in the next room fusses over a phrase until it warms and blooms. At a checkpoint far away, a guard checks the time and feels his stomach ask questions the ration book cannot answer. Here, supper will be served at 6. At 7, the first pitch will rise against the blue, and someone will call it perfect just because it happened. The factory floor speaks in percussion, riveters stuttering, hoists clanging, a foreman's pencil hitting wood like a metronome. Wing spars glide on dollies, nacelles lower as if invited by prayer, and somewhere a clock flips to the next minute while a chalkboard in block letters reads, "Goal, 96,000 aircraft, 1944. The United States is not boasting, it is scheduling. Replace a lost squadron and the line does not notice. Replace two and the line hums louder. Willow Run, a plant with its own weather, will at peak push a finished B-24 out the door roughly every hour. An arithmetic so implausible men at desks across Europe reread it before believing. This is how mercy gets financed. When Liberty ships, 2,710 or so by war's end, cycle across oceans with a cadence the enemy cannot break, coffee reaches guard shacks and camps alike. Textbooks and tuning forks share deck space with rations and .50 caliber links. A nation that can float a city of steel each month can afford to chalk baselines for enemy prisoners without starving its own front. Industrial democracy is not a slogan here. It is load charts, berths, turnarounds, and the confidence to plan concerts for men who saluted the wrong flag. Bremer reads a digest that converts loss tables into calendar math. Even a competent, disciplined defence cannot outfly factories. The Luftwaffe's pilots count sorties. American planners count trains. Tank totals tell the same story. 49,234 Shermans across the war against heavy cats measured in the low thousands. Numbers like that do not sneer, they proceed. When P-51s take the long way home because drop tanks extend their reach, the sky itself feels annexed. When depots swallow wrecks and spit out repaired airframes with bureaucratic cheer, the future arrives faster than reports can be typed. Nees would not have seen an assembly line, but he would have read its intent in the parcels that came and in the rumours that Allied camps allowed soccer and string quartets because they could. Evelyn never set foot inside a bomber plant, yet she teaches to a bell that rings with the same promise. There will be another class, another concert, another game, because something vast and democratic has decided to keep its promises. Rudy, who trusted engines more than speeches, listens to a Haydn slow movement and hears bearings that will not fail. Somewhere a siren climbs, and Bremer looks up from columns that do not love him. He redraws nothing. The map has redrawn him. The arithmetic is not personal, and it is not merciful, but it funds mercy for those who choose it. He closes the folder and hears the factory in the papers rustle. Above him, the war counts to the next hour and delivers another airplane exactly on time. Steam ghosts from boots tucked under the bunk, and the barrack air smells of soap flakes, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of chocolate that sets every mouth watering long before the wrapper rustles. On parcel day, the table becomes altar, and Staff Sergeant Walter Neese lays out the offerings with the deliberate calm of a crew chief pre-flighting a bomber. Tin of meat, powdered milk, biscuits, jam, a small slab of chocolate, tea, a packet of cigarettes, items that would have varied with supply and censorship, but which typically arrived in combinations designed to stretch a week. Men lean in without seeming to. Hunger draws bodies the way a magnet draws filings. He divides by ritual. Cigarettes become currency, chocolate becomes Sunday, the tea becomes diplomacy, with a guard who sometimes pretends not to notice a half step into the no-go when a man forgets himself. Outside, the wind snaps at the flag and sneaks under the door with a smell like wet stone. In the corner, a corporal from another camp would have called it cold-soaked. Everything you touch leaches heat, even the spoon. The latrine is a measured distance away. Nees counts the paces in his head because the tower does too. In a place ruled by meters and minutes, the parcel is theory made edible. The Allied ships that make it possible are abstractions here. Liberty hulls queuing at docks, cranes screeching, ledgers stamped. But their reality is printed in cocoa and margarine. He has heard, in ways that travel without letters, that German POWs in American camps hold orchestra practice and soccer league finals, and he stores that thought next to the chocolate square he will break with ceremony. It is not envy, it is geometry. Systems produce outcomes. He knows that as surely as he knows the bolt throw of a Car-98K by sound alone. Toward evening, men trade with banter that would be called gallows humour anywhere else. A tin of meat buys thread. 2 smokes buy a shave. A joke buys a minute of forgetting. The guard in the tower lifts his field glasses and marks a slow patrol, then turns away because nothing on this routine night looks like trouble. Niece eats with a spoon polished by other hands and lets the sweetness ride the tongue until it becomes memory of Saturdays back home, when the bakery windows fogged and the doorbell rang every time a boy chased after a nickel. He parcels the last biscuit into halves and sets one aside for later because later is how a man tells himself tomorrow exists. A whistle carries thin across the compound, only a drill this time, but enough to settle everyone's shoulders a notch lower. The stove ticks in its skin. He slides the saved chocolate under his palate and tries not to think of mornings when a minute and a metre become the only measurements that matter. Karl Bremer prefers the quiet work, the kind that smells of ink and carbon paper, where facts keep their edges. After evening rounds, he sits with the incident ledger, columns neat as parade ranks. Time, post, challenge issued, warning fired, results. The guard from post 3 stands at attention with steam still lifting from his greatcoat. His voice is flat, the way competence sounds when it has nothing to prove. The guard's report follows procedure: halt, whistle, 1 round into the sand, then no further action, and Bremer notes the cartridge expenditure and orders the spent case taped to the page, a habit he adopted to triangulate truth when memory grows fog. He turns a page that remembers less kindly. Weeks earlier, before dawn, a figure came too close to the warning wire and the report ended with the phrase "everyone has learned to file away in the place where sleep goes," shot while attempting to escape. The wording is as precise as a compass bearing, inherited from headquarters after the mass breakout at Sagan. It shelters the sentry, legitimizes the shot, metabolizes pain into paper. Bremer recognizes the legal scaffolding. He also recognizes the human afterward. The silence, the way the barrack noises disappear for a full minute as though a blanket has been thrown over the camp. He orders floodlight bulbs rotated before their rated life ends, because failure at the wrong second turns disciplines into accidents. Tower spacing has been calculated to overlap arcs. He checks the diagram anyway, pen tracing lines that would catch a man if he ran. Trip flares are topped off. The field phone line gets a tug and a click. On good nights, the geometry holds without violence. On bad ones, it becomes a machine that does exactly what it was built to do. Bremer signs requisitions that would look the same in any army: oil, rags, lamp wicks, replacement whistles, and thinks, not for the first time, that order loves its accessories. He hears the distant growl of engines and cannot tell if they belong to trucks or aircraft. The war's throat has grown hoarse with engines. In a drawer waits a digest he has been avoiding, one that converts aircraft losses into calendar math and produces an answer no curfew can amend. He closes the drawer for now. When the guard is dismissed, Bremer blots the page and the ink spreads in an oval that resembles a sight picture. He disdains sentiment, he files observable facts. Yet as he caps the bottle, he imagines an alternate column for outcomes that says nothing more dramatic than returned to barrack, lights out, quiet night. He leaves the office light burning while he walks the perimeter, a visible promise that somebody is watching even when nobody wants to. January becomes a series of white rooms with no doors. The column leaves the wire at Stalag Luft 6 and steps into a wind that finds the seam of every garment and soars until it warms itself on your bones. The Long March, men would later call it that, for lack of a better name, moves west in files that break and reform under gusts and orders. Boots thud and slide, breath smokes, and then vanishes as if the air refuses any gift that is not heat. Nies counts steps because counting delivers minutes in packages the body can carry. Guards tramp alongside, their discipline an animal with a leash. Most are practical, conserving warmth and authority in the same motion. A few are brittle with fear and hunger and swing at shadows to remind themselves of gravity. A farmyard appears like a promise and disappears like a trick. A barn roof holds snow as neat as a folded sheet. When the column halts, men squat in a silence so perfect even the dogs lower their heads for a moment. The latrine problem becomes the whole world. A man measures dignity in paces, collision avoidance by habit when privacy is an extinct species. Miles away in latitude, but a continent aside in weather, a spring programme goes to print at Aliceville. Beethoven on Friday, chorus Saturday, soccer finals Sunday if the outfield dries. Evelyn writes a short note about the slow movement as a kind of medicine and wonders, not for the first time, if mercy trained on enemies makes a sharper weapon than hate. Rudy slips a letter to a friend into the outgoing bag and describes a warehouse of play, a phrase he knows would sound treasonous to a censor, and thus writes it sideways, as admiration for American thoroughness. The march swallows hours. Some stretches would later be misremembered as worse than they were. Others would be softened because the mind dulls its edges to save the hand. A lone aircraft wanders somewhere above, engine note muffled by cloud, and men glance up out of reflex, as though the sky still belongs to decision rather than weather. What kills is not the single drama, but subtraction. Calories down, tempers short, toes numb, boots wet, wind steady. Thousands across the forced marches will die of exposure, disease, or confusion when the front lines flex faster than maps can be drawn. At dusk, Nice looks back at the path and finds no tracks because the wind has made the day anonymous. He tightens his scarf and tucks 2 biscuits into his blouse for insurance against the night. In Alabama, the quartet leans into a cadence that feels like home to men who have none nearby. 2 marches move at once, each proving a doctrine, and both are headed toward an end the numbers have already chosen. The table is too small for the story it must carry. On the left lies a ledger stamped Losses. On the right, one marked Production. A pencil bridges them like a gangplank between 2 ships in the same harbour. The trick, if there is one, is to let the numbers speak without gilding them. In 1944, American factories completed roughly 96,000 aircraft, an output that could, in a brutal arithmetic, replace the Luftwaffe's worst months, as if the sky were a reservoir topped off by shift whistle. 49,234 M4 Sherman tanks roll through the pages of procurement like a repeated chord. The enemy's heavy armour, counted in the low thousands, cannot argue with the metronome. Liberty ships turn the ocean into a timetable. About 2,710 of them are laid down, launched and sent out with holds as Catholic as democracy itself. Wheat, coffee, fuel, medical stores, mailbags, spare parts, textbooks, even the trifles that make POW orchestras credible instead of comic. A single yard, at a sprint, has been known to launch a hull in days that the enemy might require months to match in steel, if it has steel. The impossible statistic comes on a quiet Wednesday when a shift supervisor notes that one plant's day's work exceeds an entire enemy ministry's month, and no one cheers because they are behind on a different line that feeds a different front. This is not incidental to mercy. It is the cause of it. The United States can permit German prisoners to play soccer and string quartets not because it is soft, but because its depots are full and its pipelines are redundant. Abundance disciplines as surely as fear, perhaps more surely, because men prefer rules that promise the next game will be on time. A nation holding roughly 425,000 enemy prisoners across hundreds of camps does not improvise. It schedules. Bremer, who has the temperament of a bookkeeper when it comes to death, reads a digest that makes his careful ledgers look like weather diaries compared to climate. He cannot out-administer 1,000 shiploads of intent. Nice, who has learned the difference between a rumour and a fact by taste alone, converts these abstractions back into mouthfeel when a parcel arrives, despite storms and patrols and the ordinary villainy of chance. Evelyn's class meets at the hour printed because paper backed by steel is not paper at all, but instruction. The pencil pauses on a ratio so lopsided it feels like an insult to the idea of contest. Then it underlines and moves on because the next convoy is due and someone must count. After the guns quiet, paper returns to the foreground like a careful host. Investigators assemble timelines from affidavits, guard logs, medical notes, and that most eloquent of exhibits, a concert program from Aliceville dated in a hand that preserved its Sunday best, even in war. The phrase, "shot while attempting to escape," appears with numbing regularity in camp records. Prosecutors learn to prize specifics over slogans, names over categories, meters over adjectives. Where facts are soft, they say would have and likely, cautious about the line between memory and myth. Veterans give their stories without embroidery because the plainness is the point. A sentry admits to hating the quiet after the shot more than the burst itself. A former prisoner describes counting paces to a latrine in the dark and feeling the tower's gaze like a weight on the back of his neck. At another table, an educator explains why a Haydn's slow movement was necessary, the word underlined twice in a margin that still smells faintly of pencil. The juxtaposition startles younger officers, a camp that killed jargon by the page beside a camp that tuned to A. Inquiries into the murders that followed the Great Escape establish a boundary the war itself had blurred. Preventing escape under immediate threat is not the same as executing recaptured prisoners for policy. The human machinery that laundered violence, templates, euphemisms, signatures, gets aired under lights that do not blink. Names become verdicts. Not all hands are equally stained. Some were brave in small ways that do not make headlines, like the clerk who kept a copy he was told to burn. A historian would later find it in a folder that should not have survived and feel the past breathe on his neck. Elsewhere, accounting continues with a moral cadence. Remains are identified and repatriated as science permits. Families receive letters with dates that have become anchors, some from 1944, some corrected decades later after careful work by agencies devoted to the last mile of duty. The archive swallows concert programs and league standings alongside depositions, because the nation intends to remember how it behaved when victory's cost could have excused shortcuts. Bremer sits for questioning and answers in the tone of a man who cannot pretend numbers he saw did not exist. He speaks of procedures, lamps, whistles, and intervals, and the record takes it down without malice because truth's dignity requires restraint. When the session ends, someone clicks a stamp with a finality that feels like a door closing. Outside, a student orchestra rehearses under a poster for Veterans Night, and the melody reaches the steps like a subpoena from the better future. Evening falls on an empty ball field in Alabama, chalk lines still bright as if the game might resume if someone clapped twice. Half a world away, a tower light that once carved a cone through East Prussian fog has been removed, the concrete sockets collecting rain. The war's artifacts sit quietly now, but the choices they enforced still speak. We began with a minute and a meter at Heidekrug, before 0600 inside the warning wire, and a bullet described as procedure. We now end with the ledger that proves procedure could never outrun a nation that made airplanes by the hour and ships by the neighborhood. It shocks modern ears that enemy prisoners under American guard tuned Beethoven while American airmen risked death for a pre-dawn walk to a latrine. Yet that contrast is the truest measure of the systems at war. Totalitarian discipline trusted fear more than supply. American discipline trusted schedules, surpluses, and the decency that grows when you are not starved. The numbers, roughly 96,000 aircraft in a single year, 49,234 Shermans, some 2,710 Liberty ships, 425,000 enemy prisoners kept in order with games and classes, sound like myth until you stand in a county archive and touch the paper that timed the concerts. Nies would have recognized the lesson without jargon, a system that feeds hope feeds law. He survived, as so many did, by counting and sharing and obeying rules that kept men human when metal wanted them small. Evelyn would have called it civics with calluses. Bremer, who believed in forms, learned that honest ledgers condemn dishonest phrases by simple comparison. He found himself a footnote in a chapter written by factories. Rudy returned to a house with fewer windows and told his children that Americans won because they thought in trains, because their officers read timetables like prayers, and because their guards drank coffee instead of fear. From the air, the contrast is even clearer. Where the orchestra played, the guard carried an M1 that liked to speak 8 times and then ping its own punctuation. Where the tower ruled, the MG-42 buzzed its high-cycle syllables into a night that did not forgive mistakes. The decisive weapon, however, was neither rifle nor machine gun. It was abundance in service of law, steel used to hold shape rather than to gorge on power. That is what ended the tyranny that believed only in wire and a gun. The ballfield darkens. Somewhere, a student orchestra in a gymnasium reaches for the same slow movement that steadied men in 1945. When the last note lingers in the rafters and fades, it leaves behind the simple verdict this story argued toward. A free people, properly supplied and properly led, can afford to be merciful, and because of